Welcome to The Explainer. So today we're asking a really fundamental question. How does influence actually work? We're going to see how power operates in the shadows, how it totally fails in the spotlight, and how it can pop up from the most unexpected places. Let's dig in.
It's the classic question, right? Who is really in charge? We think of presidents, CEOs, the obvious people. But what if the most powerful forces are the ones we never even see? Or maybe the ones we just dismiss as, well, kind of strange. The answer, as you'll see, is way more complex than you might think.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll look at the secret architects, then the Cringefluencer campaign. After that, we'll dive into something called the moral detonator. And finally, we'll tie it all together with the three engines of influence. Okay, first up, the classic model of influence. We're talking about those secretive, powerful groups that operate just behind the curtain. And for this, we're pulling from a source that catalogs these incredible historical groups that basically shaped entire civilizations without ever stepping into the limelight. The whole idea here is that real long-lasting power, it avoids the spotlight. It works through quiet control, through conspiracy, through subtle manipulation. It's about shaping politics, trade, even war, all while staying practically invisible to everybody else. I mean, just look at the timeline here. It's staggering. The Thuggee in India are a pretty wild example. For 6 centuries, this cult controlled major trade routes using systematic, ritualized murder. Think about that. 600 years. That's an entire dynasty of influence built on nothing but secrecy and fear. And this wasn't just a one-off thing. This happened all over the world. You had the ancient Greek Pythagoreans, a math cult, that secretly ran a whole city-state. You had the assassins in the Middle East using targeted fear to control empires, all the way to the White Lotus Society, which actually overthrew a Chinese dynasty, and even a modern group like the P2 Lodge in Italy. This model of hidden power, it shows up again and again and again. All right, let's do a complete 180. We're going to jump to our second source for a totally different picture. We are going from absolute secrecy to, well, the complete opposite. The loud, public, and, let's be honest, often painfully awkward attempts by modern politicians to win us over. So, if that first model was all about hiding power, this one is about desperately putting on a show. Our second source, a segment from The Daily Show, really gets into this modern political obsession with trying to seem authentic and in touch, especially with younger voters, through stuff like social media and podcasts. And here's just a perfect example of that disconnect. You've got Governor Andy Beshear trying to use the word boo to sound relatable. Now, the intention is to connect, right? But as the source points out, the delivery just kind of lands with a thud. It feels forced and a little out of date.
And it's not just about trying to use slang either. Here's another example. Senator Ted Cruz sharing this really personal story about a teenage date on his podcast. The goal, of course, is to seem more human, to create this shared moment. But for a lot of people, the attempt just comes across as, well, awkward.
So what's the big takeaway from this source? It's this massive gap between what they're trying to do and how it's actually perceived. Politicians are trying to build influence by being relatable, by performing for the public. But to a lot of us, it just looks like pandering. It turns out this spectacle model of influence is really, really hard to get right. Okay, for our third model, we are shifting gears big time. This next source makes some really provocative claims about a powerful, emergent kind of influence, one that comes from a shared moral belief, not from some central leader. Now, it's really important to say we're just going to present the arguments from this source as they are, completely neutrally. Here's the core idea. The source calls it a decentralized moral network. Think of it like a swarm of bees. There's no single bee in charge, no one giving orders, but they all instinctively work toward the same goal. This source argues that certain ideas or texts can do the exact same thing to people, aligning them on a moral mission without any kind of top-down control. So, according to this source, for a network like this to really ignite, you need 4 key ingredients. First, a belief that some higher power is watching your actions. That keeps you committed. Second, individuals have to be free to act on their own, without waiting for orders. Third, a deep-seated belief that every single human being has value. And fourth, a powerful sense of duty to protect those who are vulnerable. It's a really fascinating theory, right? But does it actually hold up in the real world? Well, the source argues, yes, it absolutely does.
And it points to two huge historical events as proof that this engine of influence is very real.
So the first big claim from the source is that the abolitionist movement was a perfect example of this. You had people like William Wilberforce in Britain, William Lloyd Garrison in the US, Frederick Douglass. I mean, they all had different strategies and sometimes they didn't even like each other. But the theory here is that they were all independent nodes in a network, all activated by a shared moral text that ultimately came together to tear down slavery.
And the second example the source uses, well, it's even more intense. It points to the Holocaust, where you had individuals like Corrie ten Boom in the Netherlands or Dietrich Bonhoeffer in Germany, who acted totally independently at enormous personal risk to save people. According to this theory, their resistance wasn't commanded by anyone. It just emerged spontaneously from a shared moral code.
So let's pull all of this together. We've just looked at three radically different ways influence works. One that hides in the shadows, one that performs in the spotlight, and one that seems to bubble up from within. Let's lay them all out side by side. And here they are, our three distinct engines of influence. First, you've got the engine of secrecy, which runs on clandestine control, like we saw with the Thuggee. Second, there's the engine of spectacle, powered by public performance, like our cringefluencer. And finally, the engine of emergence, which, according to our third source, runs on decentralized moral conviction, like we saw in the abolition networks. Three totally different paths to power, three ways the world gets changed.
So I guess the big takeaway is that influence isn't just one thing. It can be hidden, it can be performed, and it can just emerge when you least expect it. And that leaves us with one last question to think about. In our world of social media algorithms and AI, what new engines of influence are being built right now, just out of our line of sight?